It's February 2026 and I'm continuing my visit to the Catalan city of Tarragona by stepping back into its past as Rome's first settlement in Iberia, Tarraco. From their arrival in 218 BCE until their final departure from the fall of the city to the Visigoths nearly 700 years later in 476, the city of Tarraco was the most important city on the Iberian Peninsula and the capital of the province of Tarragonense, which covered an area similar to that of north, east and central Spain today. As the city grew, it took on many of the trappings of a major Roman city, from its public forums and fortifications to the many leisure activities of Roman era, the theatre, the circus for chariot racing, and, just outside the city, located between the walls and the sea, the amphitheatre. Tarraco was one of only a handful of cities in Hispania important enough to have the full set of theatre, circus and amphitheatre, something reserved for only the most important and influential of Roman cities. The amphitheatre was the last monumental construction of the city, with works taking place between the last quarter of the 1st century through to the beginning of the 2nd. When the arena was completed, it measured 130 by 120 metres and could seat up to 15,000 spectators. On the bill were blood sports such as gladiator fights, fights with wild animals and hunting exhibitions, mixed with athletics, juggling and other exhibitions, and the perennial crowd pleaser of a good execution. Despite Christianity establishing a firm foothold in the city in the middle of the 3rd century, the Bishop of Tarragona and 2 of his deacons were martyred in the arena, being burnt alive on the arena floor. Though the slain clerics would in some ways get the last laugh, as during the Visigothic era following the collapse of the Roman Empire, a basilica church dedicated to them was built on the floor of the arena, reusing stones from the amphitheatre itself in its construction. After the reconquest of the city, a new Romanesque church was built on the footprint of the Visigoth basilica, and traces of that 12th century church are still visible today. The amphitheatre took advantage of the hill sloping down to the sea to help shape the stands, which means from the arena it's uphill all the way to reach what remains of the circus, though the most visible part is actually a 14th century addition, the Torre de les Monges, or Nuns' Tower, built as part of the later city fortifications which reused much of the original Roman infrastructure. Whilst the outline of the amphitheatre is clearly defined, it's more difficult to fully grasp the scale of the Circ Roma di Tarraco, as all that remains today is a small section of the easternmost part of the racetrack and stands, and some parts of the northern stands. Even with those limited remains, this still counts as one of the best preserved circuses in Western Europe. The full site would have been 325 metres long and 100 to 115 metres wide, with the arena floor being around 209 metres long, varying between 67 and 77 metres wide. The central spinner barrier was 190 metres long. The floor of the Plaza de la Font is part of the original arena floor, and the buildings on the southern side of the square rest on the stands, with the buildings on the northern side approximately in the location of the spinner. Construction work began on the circus towards the end of the 1st century, and the site was in operation into the 5th century. The circus had a capacity of around 20,000 people who would have come to watch both horse racing and chariot racing, with the later being divided into races with 2 horses pulling a chariot, biga, or the more common 4-horse chariots, quadriga. The circus forms part of a larger complex of buildings with a structure linked directly to the Praetorium of the Provincial Forum, which occupied the higher land to the north of the stadium, and the circus occupying a terrace below the Forum complex. Within the remains that are still visible, the most obvious feature is the marble staircase leading up into the stands. The marble is mostly a modern reconstruction, as only the 4 lower steps are preserved as they were. Visitors to the circus would have access to the upper part of the seating through this archway and staircase, and once the top would have been distributed across the stands. From here is also the best view of a small part of a racetrack that still exists, with a stone outline of a podium at the edge of the track visible. You can clearly make out the raking of the stands, and then on top level a view back to the later addition of the Nuns' Tower, and then links to the city walls, part of which are the original Roman walls that outlined the extent of the city. Beyond the edge of the circus is the view towards the Praetorium Tower, and beyond that the Forum. Down below the stands and the vaults is the area where the circulation through the lower part of the building would have taken place. Here you can walk through the passageway underneath the stands. At the end of the stands, in the connecting link to the Praetorium Tower, you can clearly make out the curve of the circus, as well as the sheer scale of the structure. The link through from the circus complex to the base of the Praetorium Tower also provides access to the other parts of the stands via the long vault. A well-preserved 94-metre long section of this passageway, at 3.7 metres wide and 2.8 metres high, this is one of the most significant parts of the structure to have survived, and links you from the main section of the ruins underneath the neighbouring streets to a preserved section of the northern stands a short distance away from the main ruins. Here you can make out the footings and rear wall of the stands as they run dead straight away towards what is today the Place de la Font. Heading back into the passageway, it extends a bit further along beneath this whole section of the northern stands until it meets the more modern foundations of the buildings built over the ruins. You can also view this part of the northern stands from the street, where again you can clearly make out the scale of the structure. Heading through from the circus, you reach the base of the Praetorium Tower. The Provincial Forum of Tarraco was a large complex of buildings and squares constructed over the highest hill of the city. At the highest point was a temple dedicated to Augustus and the imperial cult, which is today underneath the city's 12th century cathedral. The complex would have been the centre of administration for the whole region of the province and the heart of power in Hispania, home to the law courts and a meeting place of the council of notables of the province. Only a small corner of the original structure remains today, called the Torre del Pretori, of which you can explore both the lower and upper vaults, with the upper vault being home to the Hippolytus tomb from the first half of the 3rd century. In 1129, 12 years after the reconquest of the city, Norman nobleman Robert Bourdet, also known as Robert d'Aguilot, received the city from the Archbishop with a plan to repopulate the now mostly deserted city. At the time, he founded the Principality of Tarragona, which was, to all intents and purposes, an independent kingdom, and consequently Robert would need a castle to rule from. He made use of the remains of the Praetorium as a basis for his castle, leading to the tower now being fully known as the Torre del Pretori or Castell del Rei, the Praetorium Tower or Castle of the King. During the Middle Ages, the mostly Roman building was castleised with the addition of battlements to its walls. By the 17th century, it had become a military warehouse and later troop quarters. On the night of August the 19th, 1813, the Imperial French army, about to be defeated by a combined Anglo-Spanish army that previously unsuccessfully besieged the city, departed Tarragona and in the process set off a large number of explosions that caused significant damage to the castle and destroyed some other buildings. Just 9 years later, reconstruction works were started as it was considered salvageable enough to be converted into a prison, a role it served until 1953. The building underwent many years of restoration and conversion into a museum, opening to the public in 1971. At the same time as the building was being used as a prison, its roof was doubling up as an optical telegraph, forming part of a civil optical telegraphy line from Madrid to La Jonquera on the French-Spanish border, a little way north of the city of Figueres. Today, the roof serves as an ideal place to take in the views of the city and its Roman ruins, with some of the best views of the Roman circus and the amphitheatre, as well as over the old town and at the highest point the cathedral, built on the temple to Augustus. Down at ground level in the modern Passeig del Rei, you can see how the tower much more closely resembles a medieval castle, belying its Roman roots. From here, it's a short walk up the Carrera del Santa Anna to Plaza del Forum and about the only other surviving part of the Provincial Forum. Just a part of the original pale square walls with a doorway and windows survive in the middle of a modern square, though at ground level you can still just make out the stonework of other former buildings. Across town, the ruins of the last of the big three of amphitheatre, circus and theatre are generally closed, but are visible from a number of locations, giving you the opportunity to look down on them or view them from street level. The first of the big three to be built, construction was undertaken at the beginning of the 1st century, taking advantage of a steep slope of the terrain here on which the stands were partially supported. The theatre was rediscovered at the end of the 19th century but suffered significant damage in the 20th century, and by the 1970s the land had been acquired by construction companies that wanted to demolish the site. Thankfully, a local campaign stopped the works, and since then further archaeological excavations have taken place, as well as a modern reconstruction in steel as to what the structure of the site would have looked like in its heyday. At their most complete, the city walls of Tarragona stretch for around 4.5 kilometres, though today only around 1,100 metres have been preserved. The murales romanas de Tarraco were constructed in a number of phases, starting with original Roman walls built shortly after their arrival in 218 BCE, through a phase of rebuilding and expanding by the archbishops in the 14th century, and finally further bastions of fortifications being constructed by the British during their occupation of the city from 1702 to 1714 during the War of Spanish Succession. The walls were in use as a defensive fortification for the city up until the early 19th century, with Napoleonic forces rebuilding them due to the damage caused by the siege of 1811. However, with the departure of the French forces 2 years later, the walls were taken out of use and started to fall into disrepair. In 1884, they were declared a property of cultural interest and works were undertaken to restore what remained. In 1932, the space between the two sets of walls was opened for public as a garden and promenade, and today is called the Passeig Arqueològic, or the Archaeological Promenade. As you walk along the base of the walls, you can clearly make out the different stages of development, from the sharp-cornered high bastions of the British and French periods, to the simpler high but flat walls of the Middle Ages built up on the original Roman walls, with the massive Roman boulders and blocks topped up with cut blocks and stonework. Along this section of wall there are 3 towers which all have Roman origins, the largest and most visible being the Archbishop's Tower, the base of which is still Roman, and along with the walls and other 2 towers in the complex represents the oldest surviving parts of Tarraco, with construction estimated to have started around 217 BCE, 1 year after the arrival of the Romans, and being completed around 197 BCE. The upper parts of the Archbishop's Tower were part of the 14th century works to heighten the walls, and the changing colour of stone on the tower clearly shows where the rebuilding of the tower commenced. Whilst the towers survived in the initial build, the Romans actually undertook a second round of defensive building starting around 150 BCE and lasting for 25 years, which is the phase that the bulk of the surviving Roman walls actually date from. The Cabiscol Tower, also known as the Seminary Tower, is the most clearly defined part of that original Roman construction. The walls and towers all had the same construction technique, with the base being made up of megalithic blocks dotted with small doorways that only allowed the passage of one person on foot for military purposes. Above the megalithic stones are carved ashlars that build up the rest of the height of the wall. A second line of wall is built behind, and then the space in between the two facings is filled with adobe and small stones. In the first phase of construction, the walls were built to a width of 4 metres and a height of 6 metres, reinforced by the quadrangular towers of which Cabiscol, Archbishops and Minerva still exist. In the second phase of works, the walls were widened to become 6 metres thick and doubled in height to 12 metres. Camp de Tarragona railway station, around 12 kilometres north of the city centre, sits on the Spanish high-speed line between Barcelona and Madrid, with regular services to Madrid in 3 hours and Barcelona in 30 minutes. The main railway station in the city centre is on the Rodalies de Catalunya regional lines from Barcelona, with half-hourly trains making the journey to Barcelona Sant station in around 75 minutes. Reus Airport, or Barcelona as Ryanair likes to call it, is 12 kilometres west of the city centre and sees seasonal flights predominantly from the UK and Ireland from EasyJet, Jet2, Ryanair and TUI. Busplana run regular buses direct to Barcelona El Prat Airport, taking 65 minutes. Barcelona is Spain's second busiest airport and has global links.